The UFC 324 main event discussion is in the books. The all-time classic between Justin Gaethje and Paddy Pimblett was the perfect main event for that UFC Paramount debut fight card, but that wasn't the only major talking point of this night. We've got to talk about the rest of the card now, and we transition to the co-main event where Sean O'Malley was able to finally bounce back, get into the win column, and it wasn't the only win in the Bantamweight division with big implications, because I'm also going to pair it with Umar Nurmagomedov's win in the prelim headliner, and we're going to talk about what both of those wins mean for the state of the Bantamweight division and specifically the Bantamweight title picture right now. First, for the Sugar Show, Sean O'Malley, he picked up the co-main event victory at UFC 324 by securing a unanimous decision over the number 5 ranked Bantamweight Song Yadong in a pretty scrappy back and forth 15-minute bout. Although it started out pretty slow, there was a lot left to be desired. It was slightly lackluster. Not that it was a bad fight by any means, but there just wasn't a ton of output. But then in round 3, that is where things really hit a second gear, and specifically for Sean O'Malley, as he was able to really turn it on and solidify himself as the victor with the 29-28 scorecards. And so my biggest takeaway from the fight directly was that if we could have seen round 3 Sean O'Malley in round 1 and 2, I feel that not only would he have been able to really solidify just how great of a performance it was, but dare I say, I felt that he could have been able to find a finish against Song Yadong with that amount of precision and aggression that he showed in the final 5. But instead, he wasn't really able to get a lot of things going. He didn't have a lot of volume in the first 2 rounds, and he let Song Yadong compete relatively close, even winning a round on all 3 judges' scorecards. All in all, O'Malley would outland Song Yadong in terms of significant strikes 48-36, but would actually be outstruck in total 69-67 and give up 3 takedowns to Song Yadong in 2 minutes of control time. However, the bigger impactful shots were landed on the side of the former champion Sean O'Malley, but my hat is off to Song Yadong for proving that he belongs against some of the best fighters in this Bantamweight division, a former champion in O'Malley, because heading into the bout, I felt that Sean O'Malley was really going to dominate and control this fight from pillar to post, and that wasn't the case. So Song Yadong, being that he is still, I think, only 28 or 29 years old, still has a very high ceiling and potential in this Bantamweight division, but the night belonged to O'Malley, who at 31 is right in the middle of his prime years and picked up his first victory since March of 2024 against Marlon Chito Vera. Because heading into UFC 324, he was on a 2-fight skid, but both of those losses were to the same man, Merab Dvalishvili, who had a dominant 2025 with 3 title defenses. But we know that Merab would be dethroned at UFC 323 in December by Petr Yan, someone else that Sean O'Malley shares history with, and he let that be known in the post-fight interview.
All respect to Merab. If he gets the next shot, he's well-deserved. But Petr Yan, you want that rematch. I want that belt. Let's make it happen. Go out there, take care of Merab if that's what's next. If not, let's run it, baby!
And I like that Sean O'Malley wasn't naive to the fact that a trilogy is likely to take place between Merab and Petr Yan. And if I'm the UFC, after seeing this performance and Umar Nurmagomedov's performance, that should all but guarantee that the next fight for the Bantamweight title should be between Petr Yan and Merab Dvalishvili as they settle their trilogy that is currently 1 apiece. And considering that their fight in December was my favorite fight of the year, one of the best Bantamweight fights to ever take place in the octagon. And I feel like you have to reward Merab Dvalishvili for putting the company on his back in 2025, fighting 4 times, all 4 of them title fights, and 3 of them were successful title defenses. The man was doing things that we have not seen hardly anyone else do. And you heard me mention the other performance by Umar Nurmagomedov, and that is because he picked up a decision victory as well at UFC 324, and that was against the former 2-time flyweight champion turned bantamweight title hopeful, Deiveson Figueiredo. However, much like his victory against Mario Bautista last summer when he bounced back from his loss to Merab Dvalishvili, it left a little to be desired, and I, heading into UFC 324, felt that this was going to be the moment for Umar to really make a big-time splash and statement. But instead, that really wasn't what we saw. Deiveson Figueiredo competed much closer than I felt that he was going to in this fight. I didn't think that Umar utilized his grappling and wrestling as much as I felt that he should have, considering Deiveson has a 57% takedown defense, but he instead chose to strike quite a bit with Deiveson, with only 34 significant strikes landed to just 8 of Figgy, and all in all 103-28. There just wasn't a lot to hang our hat on as fight fans in this one, and Umar only attempted 6 takedowns and only landed 2 with 4 minutes and 50 seconds of total control time. And look, am I sitting here saying that Umar Nurmagomedov isn't an elite level bantamweight? No. Am I sitting here saying that he can never be a bantamweight champion? Absolutely not. But I just don't think that after the pair of victories he had following his UFC 311 loss that he's done enough to earn a second crack at gold just yet. And so you paired my thoughts thoughts with that fight with the Sean O'Malley victory, being that it wasn't the most impressive and flashy of his wins in the UFC. I don't think that either one of them should jump the line and get a shot against Petr Yan for the belt over Merab Dvalishvili. So if I'm the UFC matchmakers in the war room on Tuesday morning, this is what I would do for the bantamweight title picture. Number one, you book the trilogy fight. You do Petr Yan versus Merab Dvalishvili 3, hopefully before the middle of the year. That way the winner of that fight can fight one more time in 2026. And in that same time frame, and if you're me, even on that same exact fight card, you book Sean O'Malley versus Umar Nurmagomedov for a true solidified number one contender bout. That way the winner of the title fight and the winner of this fight would clash with one another at the end of 2026. Sean O'Malley even said in the aftermath of UFC 324, he's fresh enough that he could fight in 3 or 4 months, and I would have to imagine that Umar Nurmagomedov feels the same. And I feel like that 3 to 4 month timeline would also work for Merab Dvalishvili and Petr Yan, considering that they fought in December, meaning that they could fight in May or June, so they would have a 6-month break. And then it would work out perfectly for either a November or December fight at the end of the year. You can't work it out any better than that if you're the UFC, in my opinion, but if you agree with me, let me know down below. And if you disagree, please feel free to share where you disagree with this statement and how you would instead matchmake the bantamweights. Next we move to the big boys. Waldo Cortes Acosta, number 5 in the world, versus Derrick Lewis, number 8 in the world, the all-time leader in knockouts for the UFC. And what did we see? We saw a knockout as we all anticipated, but it was from the Salsa Boy to the Black Beast Derrick Lewis, as Waldo would pick up a 3-minute and 14-second TKO in round number 2, meaning that in the last 10 months, dating back to March 15th of 2025, he has fought 6 times. He has won 5 of those 6 and 4 of the 5 by way of knockout, including 3 in a row, all within 2.5 months of each other. November 1st, November 22nd, and January 24th. Are you kidding me? If there's any bright spots in the heavyweight division right now, it's Waldo Cortes Acosta, who is building himself into one of the biggest names in the heavyweight division right now. He's 34 years old. He's right in his prime, and he has rapidly built himself up from someone being known as a decision point style fighter to a knockout specialist in this heavyweight division. And if it wasn't for us having to wait for Tom Aspinall and the status of his eye after his 2 surgeries that he's had in the last 2 months, I would say it's a no-brainer that Waldo Cortes Acosta is a number 1 contender for the heavyweight championship. But the problem is, we don't know when Tom Aspinall is going to return, and when he does, it's likely going to be a rematch with Ciryl Gane after what happened in their no contest in October at UFC 321. So I thought that Waldo was going to say in the aftermath of this Lewis knockout that he wanted the winner of that fight and he wanted a heavyweight title shot, but instead he said he wants to fight 6 times in 2026 and directly called out Curtis Blaydes instead. And so who am I to deny this man of his wishes? Sign me up for it. Curtis Blaydes is one of the greatest wrestlers that we've ever seen in the heavyweight division's history. Waldo Cortes Acosta has turned himself into a knockout specialist. Pair them two up against one another, a striker versus a grappler. The winner of that can then get the winner of Tom Aspinall versus Ciryl Gane. Similar to the bantamweight discussion, just book it on the same night, unless of course we're waiting until June or July for Tom's return, because Waldo's likely going to want to fight in a couple of weeks, to be honest with you. Curtis Blaydes has won 2 of his last 3 fights. He's 34 years old as well, just like Waldo Cortes Acosta, and the last time that we saw him compete was in June of last year, where he earned a split decision over Rizvan Kunayev. So Curtis is in need of a big-time bounce-back performance. Even though he did win his last one, it left a lot to be desired. But if he were to come in and beat Waldo Cortes Acosta, that is all of a sudden a very good name and victory to have on your resume. And it makes sense from the rankings perspective as well, as Curtis Blaydes sits at number 4 and Waldo sits at number 5. It checks all the boxes. If he's wanting to stay active, WCA that is, then I absolutely have no issue with this fight against Blaydes and his call out. And if he keeps doing what he's doing, he's going to end up fighting every damn person in the heavyweight top 10 until there's no one left but Tom Aspinall or Ciryl Gane. Next we move to the women's flyweight division, as we saw Natalia Silva step in on short notice to replace the former champion Alexa Grasso and take on the former 2-time strawweight queen turned flyweight title hopeful Rose Namajunas, a women's mixed martial arts legend. And what did we see? We saw Natalia Silva improve to 8-0 in the UFC with her 3rd win over a former UFC champion, increase her win streak overall to 14, and prove that there is absolutely no one else that should be facing Valentina next for the flyweight championship other than herself. And I see a lot of people in the aftermath Aftermath hating on the result of this fight, even calling robbery, because of course we all know in the MMA community, whenever there's a close fight, it's always just got to be labeled a robbery. No, that's not how it works. When a fight can go either way, it's not a robbery. A robbery is when there is drastic differences in the stats and in the damage taken, and then the person with all the brutal damage given to them still wins. That's not what we saw here. Natalia Silva outstruck and outlanded Rose Namajunas across the board in every category. 51 significant strikes to 26, 63 to 46 overall, and stuffed 4 out of 5 takedowns. Round 2 was the most convincing round for Rose Namajunas. Round 3 was the most convincing round for Natalia Silva. Round 1 was razor thin, back and forth, no big moments for either fighter. But Natalia Silva landed more strikes and Natalia Silva attempted more shots, meaning that she had more volume, and it did feel that whenever the shots were landing, who was landing the more impactful of the blows? It was, to me, Natalia Silva. And I don't think that there's any way, shape, or form that you can call robbery for this fight. Now look, as a Natalia Silva fan, do I wish she would have put more of a stamp on it against someone as big as Rose Namajunas in terms of name value? Of course I do. But we can't forget that she took this fight on short notice. This wasn't the originally scheduled opponent for Rose. Natalia should have already been scheduled to take on Valentina Shevchenko, in my opinion, for the title fight, but she instead put those dreams on standby to come in and save this bout and put another big name on her resume. She's beaten 3 straight former champions in a row: Rose Namajunas, Alexa Grasso, and Jessica Andrade. I feel like where the problem lies for Natalia Silva in reaching the next level of fandom with the MMA community is that in her 8 UFC bouts, she only has 2 knockout victories versus 6 decisions. But at only 28 years old, she's just now getting prepared and ready to enter her prime, and I've called it from day one that this is someone that will be a future champion, and I think that she is the woman that can dethrone someone like Valentina Shevchenko. Because yeah, Manon Fiorot was close and competitive against Valentina, but she still didn't get the job done. No one has been able to prove that they can do it other than Alexa Grasso, and that was with a Hail Mary submission, and we saw Valentina Shevchenko turn the narrative in that rivalry very easily in their final trilogy bout. So I don't quite get all the hate surrounding the result of this fight. I understand that Rose Namajunas is one of the biggest female stars and names that we've ever seen in women's mixed martial arts, but at the end of the day, not all close fights are robberies. That's not how it works. So Natalia Silva should be next up for Valentina Shevchenko, hopefully around the midpoint of 2026, and then we can see another flyweight championship bout at the end of the year, hopefully. But what I think the harder discussion is not in the winner of the bout, Natalia Silva. I think that's the easy part, but it's with the loser of the bout, Rose Namajunas, and with other contenders named Manon Fiorot and Erin Blanchfield. What do you do with those 3 names? Because Alexa Grasso was scheduled to take on Rose in a fight that would have been very highly anticipated. She had to pull out due to injury, but does already have a replacement fight. She's now fighting Macy Barber in the next couple of months. But then that triangle of ladies, Rose Namajunas, Manon Fiorot, and Erin Blanchfield, they have all fought each other. Both of them have beat Rose, and Manon has beat Erin Blanchfield. So do we run back Manon versus Blanchfield Part 2 as a number 1 contender fight to face the winner of Natalia Silva and Valentina Shevchenko? Maybe. Manon Fiorot is coming off of a bounce-back win following her Valentina Shevchenko loss, and that was a devastating first-round knockout over the surging Jasmine Jasdavicius, and Erin Blanchfield is coming off of a submission victory over Tracy Cortez. The problem is for both Erin and Manon, they have only fought twice since their first matchup in March of 2024, which was already essentially a number 1 contender bout. Manon would go on to face Valentina and lose, and then finish Jasmine, and then Erin would go on to beat Rose and beat Tracy Cortez. Usually when a rematch happens, I like for a little bit more time and a few more fights to rack up, but maybe these two are on a collision course to fight once more. So I'm curious to hear what you think about the flyweight top 5 and the title picture specifically. How would you matchmake these ladies on the outside looking in? And do you agree with me in that Natalia Silva should absolutely be next for Valentina Shevchenko's throne? And lastly, for the UFC 324 main card, we saw a fantastic 15-minute rock'em sock'em robots war between Jean Lord Silva and Arnold Almighty Allen. These two went toe for toe, tit for tat from minute 1 to minute 15. It was a fantastic back and forth fight that saw Arnold Allen take 1 of the 3 rounds. Jean Silva is now 6-1 in the UFC, and he proved that he can bounce back from a loss, because the last time we saw him was in September, where he would be knocked out by Diego Lopez, who after that performance earned a second crack at Alexander Volkanovski coming up this upcoming weekend at UFC 325. And so come Tuesday morning, Jean Silva will be a top 10 ranked featherweight in the world, as his opponent Allen was sitting at number 6 heading into UFC 324. And I think it's possible that depending on how the UFC wants to move forward with Silva, he could be just 1 win away from a title shot. And I also just have to mention that this fight gave us one of the most historic, monumental, legendary fight picks of all time, by the way. These two are absolute characters, probably two of the most charismatic, goofy guys in the entire featherweight division, and I think that they both come out with their stock rising. Obviously for Silva being able to get a bounce back win and is going to be ranked in the top 10 in a couple of days, but for Arnold Allen, this was his first fight since the summer of 2024, and he proved that he could come back against a dangerous John Silva, go the full 15 minutes, and even deal some pretty significant damage in his own right. He is very much still amongst the elite featherweights in the world, although he has lost 3 of his last 4 bouts. So for Silva, what do I want to see next? I would love to see him face one of 2 names. Either Aljamain Sterling, the former Bantamweight title holder with numerous title defenses turned featherweight championship contender, or Yair Rodriguez, the former featherweight interim champion. I would want to see Jean Silva take on Yair Rodriguez more in terms of X's and O's and fight styles. However, there's a fight that I want to see desperately in this featherweight division, and it's Diego Lopez versus Yair Rodriguez. That is already the fight that should be booked for UFC 325, but instead the UFC decided to give Lopez a second crack at a title already. I extremely disagree with that decision, even though the fight between him and Volk is going to be amazing, don't get me wrong. But if Diego Lopez beats Volkanovski, I do not want to see Yair Rodriguez versus Diego because Yair shouldn't be fighting for a championship next. However, if Diego loses to Volk, then I would love to see those two matched up. Then we could see Aljamain Sterling versus Silva. So do you understand the puzzle that I'm trying to piece together? Essentially, it's this. If Alexander Volkanovski defeats Diego Lopez at UFC 325, then I want to see Diego Lopez versus Yair Rodriguez next. Then I want to see Jean Silva versus Aljamain Sterling. However, if Diego Lopez dethrones Alexander Volkanovski to become the featherweight champion next weekend, then I want to see Jean Silva versus Yair Rodriguez, and then either Movsar Evloev or Lerone Murphy face Diego Lopez for the featherweight title later on in the year. But let me know if you agree with my matchmaking down in the comments below. And to finish off the UFC 324 recap, we've got to talk about 2 other ranked fighters that secured knockouts and 2 other big-time finishes in general on the prelims. First is Nikita Krylov, the long-time, perennially top 15 ranked light heavyweight who currently sits at number 13, as he was able to get his first victory since March of 2023, a bounce-back third-round knockout at the buzzer against Modestas Bukauskas at the 4-minute and 57-second mark of the final round. Heading into UFC 324, I have to be transparent. I thought that Modestas was going to be able to get the nod and finally get cracked into the top 15 of the light heavyweight division, and in the aftermath, I still feel that he is the better all-around mixed martial artist, but something just felt off in this fight. He didn't quite perform to the level that I feel that he can, and Nikita Krylov took advantage of that and ultimately would land a devastating knockout at the end of the fight. And this was huge for Nikita, who had lost back-to-back fights by way of first-round knockout heading into UFC 324, and even though he has now 42 professional bouts, he is still only 33 years of age. So in the light heavyweight division, you could say that he's just now getting ready to enter his prime, but the fight years would say otherwise, and especially when you consider that 38 of his 42 fights have not gone the distance. The man is kill or be killed. And I feel that he had a perfect call out in the aftermath of this bout, and it was a rematch many years in the making against Jan Blachowicz, the former light heavyweight champion who currently sits at number 5 in the world, but is coming off of a lackluster draw that he had against Bogdan Guskov at UFC 323 in December. This would be a rematch nearly 8 years in the making, as they first met back in September of 2018, where Jan Blachowicz would secure an arm triangle choke victory in round 2. And I think that a fight like that would make more than enough sense. Nikita Krylov attempting to break back into the top 10, an inch near the top 5, and for Jan Blachowicz, he obviously wasn't able to earn a crack forward in the rankings after his fight in December, so the next best option is to fight someone behind him but still in the rankings and attempt to hold his spot amongst the elite at light heavyweight. It checks all the boxes for me. Nikita Krylov, perfect call out, great knockout victory. Now let's see if he can get one more in 2026, an inch closer to light heavyweight title contention. And we saw another much needed bounce back knockout victory on the prelims, and that belonged to the former title challenger and number 11 ranked flyweight Alex Perez, who knocked out Charles Johnson in just 3 minutes and 16 seconds and dominated the fight up until the finishing blow. And I say that this was much needed, just like Nikita Krylov, because also entering UFC 324, he was coming off of back-to-back back-to-back finish losses and had actually lost 4 of his last 5 bouts. So this was a massive, massive moment for Alex Perez. You could just tell and feel it with the emotions that he was showcasing in the aftermath of the bout. This meant so much to him, and at only 33, he's still at the end of those prime years. The problem is he did miss weight for this bout, so that definitely halters some momentum and kept him from getting the new $25,000 finishing bonus. But weight miss aside, this was a great performance from Alex Perez, and he more than earned a shot up in the rankings after this fight. The problem is he's already fought so many of these guys that there aren't a ton of fresh matchups. But there's 2 that could be next and that would make sense in terms of rankings and career trajectory, and it's either Steve Erceg, a former title challenger who's coming off of a bounce-back win as well, or Tim Elliott sitting at number 9, who also is a former title challenger coming off of a win against Kaya Sakura. Both of those from an X's and O's stylistic perspective would be very fun fights. I think either of them could also justify being a fight night main event and would allow for movement in the back half of the top 10 of the flyweight division, with a ton of moving pieces happening right now up ahead in the top 5. We saw the incredible Josh Hokett, pick up his 2nd knockout victory in the UFC, keep his 100% finishing rate intact and his perfect professional record, 8-0, 5 knockouts, 3 submissions, and this time it was a TKO in the final second of round 1 against Denzel Freeman. And let me tell you something, this guy is a character, and is it for better or worse? That's for you to decide, that's for you to be the judge, but regardless of what you think or feel about him, he is a breath of fresh air, and dare I say, a much needed breath of fresh air for this disastrous heavyweight division right now. And he's only 28 years old, so we don't see a lot of heavyweights truly enter their prime until 34, 35, 36, later on into their careers, being that they don't have to cut as much weight, so he still has plenty of time to grow and learn and evolve as a fighter, and he already has an extremely athletic background behind him, a former 2-sport collegiate athlete in wrestling and football. He is one of those next generation type of athletes for the heavyweight mixed martial arts divisions. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't be surprised if he has already earned a top 15 heavyweight, considering that it is a very stale, lackluster division that doesn't have a ton of depth to it. But I also wouldn't be surprised if he fights one more time beforehand. Let me just tell you right now, the call out that he had against Waldo Cortes Acosta, that ain't happening. Could we see that fight one day? Of course. Could we see it by the end of 2026? Maybe, but it will absolutely not be next. And lastly, the first ever UFC Paramount fight to take place was between Ty Miller, a UFC debutant, and Adam Fugit, the longtime veteran. And we saw the 25-year-old Miller keep his perfect professional record intact and picked up his 3rd knockout victory of his career by finishing Adam Fugit, and this was also at the buzzer of round 1 at the 4-minute 59-second mark, the first time that had ever happened back-to-back on a fight card. The 2025 Dana White Contender Series alum is someone to keep your eyes on in the welterweight division, but it didn't come all fine and dandy as he was getting landed on and was even bleeding in that bout, so I'm not quite sure what to make of his skill set, of his potential just yet, but at only 25, he has all the time in the world to continue to grow. So that is it. UFC 324 is in the books. The 6-week UFC hiatus is behind us, and now we are looking forward to 42 more UFC events in 2026, and next up is UFC 325, another massive numbered event with a championship bout at the top of the bill. We are back in full swing, baby. So be sure to give me all of your thoughts and your reactions to UFC 324 down in the comments below, and what you think is next for the big winners and even some of the losers on this fight card. And if you enjoyed my recap, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new, as we just hit the major YouTube milestone of 1,000 subscribers on Saturday, the day of UFC 324. And so the energy is flowing, the 2026 year is kicking off the right way, and we are only going to continue to grow stronger and build this community as the year progresses. And you can join it across all platforms, whether that be YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Instagram, TikTok, X, and everything in between. The show can be found across all those platforms at Verbal Spar MMA, where you can join in on the discussions, be a part of the community, and stay up to date with all of the biggest MMA news, fight announcements, previews, and recaps. Have a great week, and I will see you all in the next video.